Oliver Van Heel, Radley Yeldar. My question is about materiality. We've been talking about materiality now for about 10 years. The GRI was bang on about it back in the early 2000s. And yet, if you think about it, the importance of communicating information that is material as a way to influencing investor behavior, any changes in investor behavior have been incremental at best. So my question is materiality material or is it a red herring?
Could be a question for you, Rory. Okay, I'll start again. So let's start with the conventional investor or accounting definition of materiality, which is typically something along the lines of 5 to 10% of a key financial indicator or a key performance measure. So if one talks about what is material to investors, and that's over 1 or 2 years time frame, so relatively short time frame, the consequence is that most social and environmental issues are not material in that frame of reference. That's it. So when you say, why don't investors read sustainability reports? Why are they less enthusiastic about the inclusion of social and environmental issues into annual reports and accounts? By definition, they're not interested. Of course, that is, the fact that investors may not be interested in something does not mean it's not important to the business. And I think actually the problem is the way in which everybody claims their issues are material. So an NGO would say, climate change is a material issue. Well, clearly it's important to the planet. But that doesn't, and it's important to the NGO or those who care about climate change, that doesn't mean it's important to the business. And it doesn't mean it's important to the business's investors. Similarly, when companies talk about issues that they see as material, they talk about a whole load of issues that they need to manage effectively in order to have a successful business. But investors will probably say, well, that's fine, that's an operational issue, you need to manage it. That doesn't mean I need to know anything about it. So I think I would actually start by saying, we need to be clear, what are we talking about? If we're talking about financial materiality as accountants or investors define it, that leads us to identifying certain issues as important. If we're looking at companies, I mean BP or Marks and Sparks or whoever, they would talk about issues that are I guess more strategically material. They're issues that they need to manage in order to be successful over the short, medium and long term. If we're talking about stakeholders or NGOs, they will have issues that are important to them because of their beliefs or whatever values they're interested in. So I think there's actually a real issue, which is that we all appropriate the term materiality when what we really are saying is important to me as a stakeholder or me in the context of my interests. So I actually think probably the more important discussion is to try and split out who are you, what's important to you, and how do you define that importance. And I think then, because I find so much of this debate on reporting, and the Integrated Reporting Council's document falls into the same trap. It starts off by claiming this is about investors and it's about materiality, and then it goes into this stakeholder rant. And it's just completely unhelpful. We're far better off being clear about what it is we're talking about, acknowledging that materiality to investors does not mean the same as materiality to NGOs, for instance, or to local communities, and move forward from there with clarity about what we're talking about, not using a term like materiality and ending up having a dialogue of the deaf, which I think is where we are at the moment.
I guess just to add to that, I think it's absolutely right. Materiality to who? Everybody has different issues, and we're constantly engaging with all parties to try and work out what it is they think is material or important to them. And it depends on your business. I would argue for Marks and Spencer, our reputation is a significantly material, important issue, and therefore much about what we do in Plan A is protecting our reputation. So I think materiality or importance, is lots of different things. It's not just financial materiality, and it matters to different people. Our shareholders have a very different view than our customers, and have a very different view than NGOs and opinion formers out there.
I think the only thing that I would add to that is kind of support of what Rory was saying in terms of kind of the big issues, the climate change and water. When we're working on our materiality prioritization of issues, it's always tough. Where do you put water in terms of impact of for BP to deliver its strategy as opposed to stakeholder concern? Because it's not material today, we cannot say it, and so that's we put most of the kind of the emerging issues there, kind of as a medium to high priority, which is an interesting challenge, which is not where external stakeholders would perceive them at all.
Okay, I think we might move on to the next question because we've got about 6-7 minutes left. So can we have one? There's a question over here.
Gabriella from Everything Everywhere. I wanted to ask something around Alan's statement around accessing and demanding information and actually making purchasing decisions that reflect the information that you've accessed. And I would argue actually that Generation Y does not do that. So it might access the information, it might share it, but all the businesses you've mentioned, I would say, maybe Marks and Spencer's would disagree, are not the traditional consumers of these businesses. Is there kind of a view around the table?
And do you want to respond on behalf of your generation?
Can you just give a bit more, elaborate on your question, if that's all right?
Well, you've stated that Generation Y is the one that really drives a lot of the behavioural changes and demands more information. I agree that Generation Y potentially demands more information, but I would argue that it is not acting on that information. So it's not the target group, it's not the group that goes and buys at Marks and Spencer's, for example. So I'm kind of questioning what the value is of asking for all this information if, from what I'm perceiving, the purchasing decision is not influenced on any level. Generation Y wants shiny new, shiny new.
Okay. Well, I think that Generation Y does actually act on those purchasing decisions. I mean, as only one member of that, you know, when I go and buy lots of things that I use, I always find out about the company and find out more about, you know, whether it's fair trade, you know, whether it's being used in sustainable sort of supply chain, things like that. And I think that actually, the thing about Generation Y is that they very quickly become the Marks and Spencer's consumers of the future. So you might start off as a student, you know, going to sort of cheaper shops. But then as you sort of rise up the ranks, you end up going to M&S and you end up in Waitrose. But yeah.
But that's my point. As Generation Y, they're not.
I think we have a reasonable size of Generation Y that does shop in our store. I'll be talking to Alan afterwards, but I do agree with the point. You know, whether it's Generation Y or whoever it is, in terms of what people say and what they actually act upon. So recycling's a good example. Everybody says, I'm really interested in recycling, want to be able to recycle more, but how many people when they're in a store go, I'm not buying that because it says X, Y, or Z. So I think it's an area we think, we're already seeing is people are starting to act more upon, and we think it's going to grow. But I do agree there is a bit of a disconnect with what people say and what action they actually take. But I think that's regardless of, you know, age group or generation.
Does anyone else want to add, or should we move on? But I think it's an interesting question. Certainly Generation Y seems to act when it gets angry. And the Arab Springs were a very good example of that. And I think if you get youth unemployment rising from 20% today to 40%, and they're unemployed and they're starting to ask questions about social purpose, it may be a different kind of question, but they'll still demand transparency. But we're not there yet, and hopefully we won't get there. Another question sort of from round the back there. I think I saw a hand earlier. Well, there's a hand just here, so let's take that hand there.
Hi, Daniela Holt from Skanska. And you mentioned social media, tweet, Facebook, but what is the strategy for either BP and Marks & Spencer into engaging and sharing the sustainability story through social media?
Sorry, I was waiting for the microphone. Sorry. So I think, one, I can't remember if I said this when I was presenting, so sorry. Many more people that were kind of against, kind of anti-BP during the Gulf of Mexico used Facebook and Twitter. So we use it very much to kind of provide kind of ongoing messaging about, you know, this is what's going on, this is how things really are right now in the Gulf of Mexico. We're probably going to start a kind of a whole new campaign in the US using social media, but in the end, we think the destination will be back on the website. That we want to kind of say that this is we want the conversation going over there. We want the kind of the nicer, probably more informal tone of voice. But in the end, you know, for the factual data, we think that will still sit on bp.com.
But you direct people through this media,
Yeah.
through your website.
Yeah, exactly.
So from an M&S perspective, we'll use all channels out there, be it the newer social media or, you know, anything we can to try and communicate. And that's whether it's on a sort of an engagement level. So we've done sort of Facebook question and answer sessions to, you know, our customers or anyone who wants to engage in that way. Twitter, you know, website, you know, we'll use any channel that's available. I think it's important to remember, though, there is a wide spectrum of people out there, different age groups that are looking to engage in different ways, and we've just got to be mindful that actually we don't jump too far one way, and you know, we've got to cover all bases. But it's evolving. We're still learning, and it's really interesting seeing the stuff on Facebook where we'll put messages up or an announcement up, and you know, 2 hours later you've got 100 customers that have made comments. Some of them good, some of them bad. Sometimes they go off in completely weird directions. But part of it is just about putting it out there. And being open, but also it's really interesting for us to see actually what the feedback is, because that then helps inform us and, you know, what we do next time and how we articulate something or where we focus some of our efforts. So we find it really valuable, but you know, we're still learning.
I think corporates are always going to be in this learning phase with social media. I think I'm not sure that I know, and I'll look to Alan, whether anybody's kind of successfully done it in terms of corporate.
Well, I think some of the more sort of retail brands, the FMCG companies, some of the more high-end fashion labels, where I guess they have had a slightly easier route to market because their consumers are very upwardly mobile, probably use multiple devices, probably travel quite a lot. So I think some of the more retail-based sort of high-end corporates have had a easier route to it. But actually, I'm sure that actually other more industrial corporates are actually going to catch up eventually.
Well, I think we're out of time. So I'd just like to say a big thank you to our panel tonight on this fast-moving and very interesting subject. A big thank you to you, the audience. Thank you for your tweets. I'm sorry I didn't actually work in any questions, but I'll get better at that for next time. And I just want to say a thank you to Bank of America Merrill Lynch, who provided this lovely Christmas tree for us, which has added a Christmas dimension to tonight, but also it's just an opportunity to say thank you to Bank of America Merrill Lynch, who provide this fantastic venue for us to do this every month. So thank you to everybody, and we now have round tables.